100%. I think that people get really excited about the idea, right? They get excited about the idea, and I think that a lot of the times they underestimate how much time it actually takes to create it, or they don't have a process that supports their life, right? Like you have 4 podcasts. I'm sure you have a system whether it's like an extravagant system or not, you have some kind of system or process that works for you, but you also very likely, I mean, I'm making a lot of assumptions right now, but you also very likely have prioritized how it's important in your life, in your business, and so on. If you don't make space for it in your week, you're not going to do it, right? Like you need to have time set aside to edit if you're doing everything yourself, right? You need to have time set aside to edit. You need to have time set aside to create all your promo stuff. You need to have time set aside to record. And if you don't prioritize those things in your day, your week, your life, you don't it doesn't just magically happen, right? Like if I don't set time in my calendar to sit down and record episodes for my podcast, they're not going out. And I literally have done this before. It has happened before. And so what I would say is you have to understand your own self and what makes it successful for you.
Welcome, everybody, back to the Full Battery Media Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Trace, and I have an awesome guest with me today. Would you like to tell people who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. My name is Simona. I run a podcast production agency. It's called Volt Productions, and we create podcasts for entrepreneurs and small business owners to help them launch, grow, and monetize their shows.
That's awesome. How did you get started down that path? What was it that called you to go and through those doors?
Okay, so I never set out to actually have a media production company or anything like that. I started podcasting in 2018 with my first podcast. It's called Happiness Happens. And that show was born out of a moment of life. Like I woke up one summer and I was so deeply unhappy and I couldn't figure out why. Because I don't know, you have those moments in life, right? Where you're like,
I
what is
understand.
going, like, gotta be more to life than this, And so I kept thinking to myself, like, gosh, there's got to be more to life than this. And so I woke up one summer, I was so deeply unhappy. And it was kind of a paradox because if you looked at my life from the outside, everything looked totally fine. Like, you have a really good job. At the time, I had a boyfriend that turned fiance, that turned husband, then turned ex-husband. That's a whole story in and of itself. And I just kept thinking to myself, like, there's got to be more to life than this. And so what I started to do was I started to sort of deep dive into different areas of my life and to understand what it was that made me happy. And through doing that, my Happiness Happens podcast was born. And it was quite an interesting venture. I did a lot of solo episodes when I started. I did guest interviews, and then those guest interviews turned into conversations with different business owners to understand how they got to where they are in their life and, how they sort of stepped outside of the box that society creates for you and really lived their life in the exact way that they wanted to. And then so of course, as time goes on, I kept doing, my own podcast, and I started a freelancing business on the side on Fiverr. And I had a whole bunch of clients that I worked with one-on-one through Fiverr. And as, the world would have it, it shut down when it did. And I took that opportunity to jump in and was like, hold on. There's not very many times in your life where you get a full opportunity to hit the reset button and to actually start the thing that you want to do. And I knew I wanted to work for myself. I knew I wanted to be a business owner. I knew I wanted to have my own business. And so I just did. So I took those clients that were on Fiverr and I messaged them, which is, you're not supposed to do this, but I said, if you come to me directly, I will give you a better rate. So I did. And we launched our services officially in March of 2021 and sold out in 72 hours. And we have never stopped since. So that's just how it rolled. So I didn't set out to do any of it. It's just, a little bit of action, a little bit of intention, and, a desire to live a life that you want and build it how you want to build it. That's how we got here. And we're just getting started. It feels like we're just getting started anyways.
That's awesome. Well, I want to ask you this because you've got so much experience now. What's the biggest mistake normal people make when they start trying to go down this path? They start to create a podcast. What are the mistakes that they make?
Oof, I feel like there's a lot of different ones in different lenses. I think people tend to underestimate the actual creation process of the podcast. You have an idea for a
Yeah.
show, you have this idea, you have this podcast that you wanna make, right? That becomes an extension of you. It's an extension of your voice, and it's an extension of your message, which is fantastic. And then also the part that people miss in that is, how does it impact other people? How does the thing that you're creating, that you want to bring into the world, impact the people who are going to receive it? So when we start with a new client, or if I'm doing a talk or, any kind of training or a podcast interview, I always pose this question. If you have a podcast now, or if you have an idea that you want to start a podcast, I always encourage people to go to these three questions. What is my podcast about? Who is it for? And then why should they care? That idea of why they should care is so important, because that's the piece that relates what you do with why your audience will care about it. And that's sort of the thing that becomes your through line. It's your bridge into everything else that you're doing, because you can create a podcast for yourself. That's what I did with my Happiness Happens show. I created it for myself. And also, what happens sometimes when you don't have clarity on why people should care, it gets the content confusing. And so what happens is people get so excited about this podcast idea. They launch their show. They're so gung ho about it. They put out the episodes that they want without really understanding even what should those first few episodes be, and how does it relate to the audience in a way that encourages them to A, press play, B, follow and subscribe to the show, and then C, listen to the whole thing through, and then keep coming back every single week, right? So if you think about, you have this idea that you have for yourself, but you really haven't related it back to somebody else. And that's sort of the missing link, in my opinion. That's sort of the missing piece between one thing that podcasters and creators sort of miss or get wrong, is that idea that you actually don't really know who you're talking to, you don't know who it's for, and then it lands flat. So now you have this incredible idea that you know is a good idea, that I know is a good idea, but you actually don't know how to bridge that connection with your audience, and then you don't develop the audience, and if you don't develop the audience, you don't grow the show, and if you don't continue to develop the audience and grow the show, you can't monetize in whatever way you want to monetize. So it's kind of this like whole circle, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. One of the things that I think that is hard for people is they don't realize the full package. Like, I want to
Mm,
go and talk to someone. Okay, that's great. That's the
me too.
conversation. Yeah, right? I love talking, but what about the packaging? What about what about the content? What are you going to talk about? Where are you going to go with it? Like, what is your mission? What are you trying to do with this? Are you trying to network? Are you trying to sell something? Are you trying to just get out there and be seen? Or you wanted to do TED Talks? Like, there's so much. And when people just like, well, I'm just winging it, you're going to burn out, because if you don't have that figured out, you're going to really not know where to go. And it's challenging. It's really challenging to always get the parts right. But like, it leads to my next question. Like, why do so many podcasts fail even when the person behind them is smart and professional or passionate? Why do they fail?
Well, so specifically to what you just said, the content, but then also who are you, I would say three parts. So the first one would be, who is it that you're talking to? Okay. If you don't know who you're talking to and how your content lands with other people, you're
Hmm.
not going to reach them in the way that you want to. Now, each podcast serves a different purpose. If you're wanting to build out your speaking career, right, or become the thought leader
Hmm.
in your space or showcase your expertise, you can do that with solo episodes, but I always say with solo
Yeah.
episodes, how does that content actually relate back to the person who's listening? Do you give them something
Mm.
tangible that they can take away with them and implement into their life, right? So the that's kind of the first piece. And I think there's a whole other side to this, is the actual promotion of the podcast. The way that we promote things today is so different than years ago, right? If I were to start my podcast today in the same way that I did years ago, it literally would be distributed to no one. Like, it's such a different time. There's so much content out there. There is so much noise. There are so many clips. There's so much, blogs and articles and all of the things on every single platform, that if you don't know how to actually grow the show and you don't have a solid plan behind marketing it, you're not going to get the reach that you want. And I think that's a challenging part because we're here together on your podcast. You know how much work it is on the back end of it, right? Like you do the recording, which is great. And then you do the editing of it, which is fantastic. And a lot of people are mentally done after they do the editing of it. That there's no space and no capacity to be doing the actual promotion of the podcast. But how else is everyone going to hear it? So then you look at things like, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Sean, but we do things like the SEO side, optimizing show notes, optimizing your titles. It's a lot of stuff for people to learn, right? Like it's a lot and it can feel overwhelming. And I think it's easier to just have the conversation and publish it and be like, okay, cool. Like that's fantastic. Here's the conversation. But then it's like, if you don't have a solid promo plan and growth plan behind it, then what? It just falls on deaf ears.
Right? Well, that's something that I think is spot on because people think that you're going to create something amazing and then people are just going to show up. But, your podcast has to be more than just content. And you say that the podcast should be more than just content. What should a great podcast actually do for a business or a person? Like, what is the real purpose of this podcast?
I would say this answer can change depending on what sort of context, but what's coming to mind most prominently for me right now, like lately, is visibility. And I feel like all of these words can turn into buzzwords, right? It's the same thing as authenticity and, whatever else, like all these words that we've used and overused over the years, right? But when you think of visibility, you have a podcast for the purpose of being seen in some kind of way, right? You want to share your message, you want to amplify a TEDx talk, you want to, get more stages, you want to grow your business, you want more coaching clients, you want people in your programs, you want to sell a service, right? So how do you do that without becoming more visible? How do you do that without getting in front of the right people? It's very challenging, right? If you don't have a way to connect your message with the person that you want to reach, but also in a way that actually is speaking their language and resonates with them deeply, you have a harder time becoming more visible. But what I think it does for your business overall, if you're strategic with your content. Now, here's the thing. I feel like there's two sort of lenses that you can look at it through. The first lens is the podcast is entertainment, right? Like you have
Yeah.
shows that fall into your true crime, your entertainment, your comedy, and like, your maybe even self-help can kind of be entertainment in some kind of ways. But then you have the creators that are creating for a specific business purpose. The intention
Yeah.
is to either grow the business, like I said before, purchase a course, join a program, get some coaching or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that thing is. Well, you have to have some kind of production schedule. You need to have some kind of, um, you need to have some kind of idea of what content you're putting out, when you're putting it out, and how does it align to everything else you're doing in your business, right? So if I think about, a show, and so I'll give you an example. I host another podcast. It's called As It Relates to Podcasting. And on that podcast, I teach people specifically how to launch, grow, and monetize their shows. That is the purpose of the podcast. When I first launched that show, I had launched it with guest interviews. I was like, oh, okay, let me launch this podcast, interview other industry experts. We'll come together, collaborate, we'll have a conversation, and we'll both be able to share our expertise. Fantastic. Then what I found out over the years of having the podcast is my listener genuinely did not care about the guest. They did not care about hearing about what the guest had to say. They wanted
Right?
to hear what I had to say, which I was like, well, that's surprising because I'm like, cool. And you go into your mind of like, do I really have things that are that important to say that someone would want to hear just, like just my thoughts on it? And so they did. So I shifted the podcast to solo episodes only. And I got really targeted and I got really specific of what each episode serves. So back in September of 2025, I decided to do a whole podcast launch series. It was actually really interesting. I did an onboarding call with a client and I took the transcript from that call and I turned it into, I think it was like 13 different episodes. And I went through every single part of the strategy call, turned it into an episode, and it was my podcast launch series. It was an onboarding call with a new launch client. Those videos, that content, some episodes were 5 minutes, some were 12, some were 15, some were 20. And I dialed the content in so specifically. That content has done so well. And months and months and months later, it's still doing so well. There's a couple videos that popped off because they were so targeted that it has continued to grow my channel. It's continued to grow my views. And I'm like, wow, this is really fantastic. Like, that's what we all want, right? And so I had to get really specific on the content and understand exactly how that content serves my audience overall. And when I did that, it was like a secret unlocked. And I don't do heavy promotion on the podcast. I'll post a couple clips here and there. I make sure it's optimized to its fullest point, but the algorithm needs to understand what you're talking about. The algorithm needs to know where to classify your content. And that's a huge differentiator in shows that do really well and then shows that don't. The ones that don't tend to be unclear, right? Like, so anyways,
Yeah.
I digress. And I just say all of this to say, like,
No.
the visibility side is really important.
You have to pay attention to what your audience want. One of the
Yeah.
funny things that you pointed out that I just was like, so 100% all about. Like, I have been leaning, especially for I've got 4 podcasts, and one self-help, like the Sean Trey show is like all about resilience. And I talk to like Navy SEALs and military guys. I have the Growing Money podcast. That's all about personal finance because I knew nothing about personal finance and I wanted to learn about it. So I started talking to all these financial experts. Then I have my Full Battery Media podcast, this one, which is the same name as my company, because I love talking to other people that are doing stuff to like share, because like, dude, I don't know everything. And like, if I can share with my listeners and help promote them and we get more people doing good stuff, that's great. And then I have Barrels and Roots, which is all about wine, because I love slowing down and having a good glass of wine. And I grew up in the wine country. So,
Oh, I love it.
right. But one of the things that I realized on the Sean Trey show is that I started doing more solos and people started watching them more because people like to hear me talk. They want to hear how Sean dealt with this. How does Sean feel about this? The same thing with Growing Money. Like, I was starting to talk about money, like, don't be stupid. Don't try to impress people with money you don't have. And that video does really well. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. But you don't always know unless you're starting to try to figure it out. And I think that
100%.
the most important thing for me was going, okay, let's try to figure it out. Let's sit there and look at what those steps look like and,
Mhm.
how we can try something new and not judging the process, not getting there and getting into the weeds. Just let's see. Let's see
Exactly.
where we can go from here. And I think that that was the most successful thing for me was this ability to sit there and go, where do we go from here? And that where do we go from here was a very, very fun thing. And it wasn't always clear, but it was a journey. It was an unfolding. And I think that that was being present through the process was allowed me to most enjoy the process. And I wanted to
Mhm.
ask you this because, a lot of people start a podcast and burn out quick. And we already talked a little bit about why that is, but could you talk to me a little bit more about why you think that happens?
100%. I think that people get really excited about the idea, right? They get excited about the
Yeah.
idea. And I think that a lot of the times they underestimate how much time it actually takes to create it, or
Yeah.
they don't have a process that supports their life, right? Like, you have 4 podcasts. I'm sure you have a system. Whether it's like an extravagant system or not, you have some kind of system or process that works for you, but you also very likely, I mean, I'm making a lot of assumptions right now, but you also very likely have prioritized how it's important in your life, in your business, and so on. If you don't make space for it in your week, you're not going to do it, right? Like, you need to have time set aside to edit if you're doing everything yourself, right? You need to have time set aside to edit. You need to have time set aside to create all your promo stuff. You need to have time set aside to record. And if you don't prioritize those things in your day, your week, your life, you don't it doesn't just magically happen, right? Like, if I don't set time in my calendar to sit down and record episodes for my podcast, they're not going out. And I literally have done this before. It has happened before. And so what I would say is you have to understand your own self and what makes it successful for you, right? So I don't know what your
Hmm.
process is. I'd love to hear a little bit about it. My process is I have to sit down and batch record things because I don't have the capacity every single week. I travel a lot, right? I travel a lot and I'm always going somewhere and doing something. And so I need to be able to sit down and record 4 to 6 episodes in, a not a 1-hour block, there's no way, but like maybe in like a 2 or 3-hour recording block, get all those episodes done and do that once a month. Well, in order for me to be successful at doing that, then I need to know what I'm talking about, right? Like I don't want to get here on a Monday and have like a 3-hour recording block and be like, so what do I want to talk about this week? Or like, what do I want
Right.
to talk about for the next 6 weeks? Like, no, I need to understand. I need to know exactly what I'm going to be recording. And of course, you can add things in that are more relevant to your life specifically today. But I like to take a little bit of time throughout the month, construct what the next few episodes are going to be, put some ideas together, have some thought starter ideas. Every solo episode that I do, I have a main topic for it and then 3 points. So I know that I need time to build out what that looks like so that when I go sit down to hit record, I'm not sitting here being like, what are we talking about over the next 2 months? Like, no, I just sit down, I record, I know exactly what I have to do, and then, it goes on. Now, I'm very lucky. I have my team that edits my podcast episodes for me, so I don't have to worry about that side of it. But that's something that's important for me in order to be successful, right? So my question back to the audience and back to the listener today is like, where can you find ways that people can also support you in your process, right? Like you may not have hundreds and thousands of dollars to put towards your podcast, but you may be able to find someone that can help support in different ways, right? So kind of twofold. So that's one lane. I'm curious, what do you think?
I think that systems are more important than anything else. And I
Yeah.
think if you do not have a system or multiple systems in place, you are going to burn out. I think you will have a very hard time. You are going to have a very, very challenging time just showing up every day because showing up is a fun thing to say. But, how do you go about showing up? For me, showing up means that I have to um, engage with my team. I have to engage with the planning. I have to sit there. Let me give a better example. Like right now, my daughter has a YouTube channel and it's something that we work on together. I started with her when she was a little kid. She has 11,000 subscribers for
No
Ilani's Little
way.
World. Yeah, it was something that
What's
we
it called?
started Ilani's Little World. It's an educational channel that we started together. Now, when we started that, part of the whole goal was to teach her about life and content and having fun. When we did it though, there was an interesting side effect that happened. Is like it just became this journey for her. Now, she's home on summer vacation and I'm sitting there going, Ilani, I got her a very cheap phone that she is learning to go ahead and use. And that means that she gets to go and film some things with mom and with herself and put together a little bit of content. Now, it's a journey and how we're doing it is about teaching her the steps. But one of the things today, we sat down and we were like, all right, to do this, the most important thing is simply to try to show up. And you got to do that in a very simple way. Like, how do you show up? Well, you got to sit there and figure out what are the steps that you need to take to make 5 videos? So you're going to make 5 videos this week. Okay, great. What does that look like? How do we do that? Because if you're not doing it right, it's going to be very tiring. And that
Mhm.
very tiring nature is something that you have to figure out how to do repeatably. And so
Mhm.
I had my team sit down with her today and say, okay, here's Ilani. You're going to work with her. And her goal is to learn from you how this is all going to work. And they were like, okay. And so she sat down and she worked out her menus, the stuff they needed to get for her videos. And it was fun. But it was a process that we had to go through so that she could understand how that works, what that looks like. And if a 10-year-old can repeat this process, and if a 10-year-old can be able to do it, I promise you that you can as well. And
100%.
I think that that's the thing that you simply have to do is to set yourself up for success. But the hardest part is that people don't realize what it takes to be successful, the consistency, the going back at it every single time. It is exhausting if you're not used to it.
100%.
So I talk to people and say, this is how we're going to help you succeed. one step at a time. And they're like, oh my goodness, I'm a little overwhelmed. But I'm like, don't be. We'll get you there. But you have to be willing to just smile, grin, and go, where are we at today? What are we doing
Mhm.
today? Today
Exactly.
is a new day, and I can get through today if I can figure this all out. And figuring it out
Exactly.
is the journey, you know?
Exactly, and also too, I think about right now we're in the process of launching 2 new podcasts, and the tech side of it has been, for the client, more overwhelming, and I just think to
Hmm.
myself, I'm like, "Well, take your overwhelm and actually ask me how you would fix it, right? Let's sit down together and let's do it together and let's build it out together," because I think the misconception, not even a misconception, I think maybe, especially as a business owner and an entrepreneur, you tend to think that you have to do all of the struggle alone, you know?
Yes.
And you don't always have to do that. Like, there are lots of people that are more than happy to help you, just like your team is helping your daughter figure out how to do this from A to Z. And I wanted to comment too, just on like the resilience side of the skills that you're teaching her. Maybe she'll want to do the channel forever, but then maybe she won't. And maybe she'll be over it and she'll be like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do something else. But presenting the opportunity and giving her like the opportunity to try something new and to learn something new
Yes.
and to do it in a way that is actually, building up in the world. So this is like something that I think
Hmm.
about often. We have the opportunity, right, as creators of any age to add more good into the world or more chaos into the world. We live in a world today where there is so much chaos, right? So what
Yes.
side of the creation process do you want to be on, right? And so if you think about, I even think about channels for kids, okay? Like my stepkids watch YouTube, and some of the stuff they watch, I'm like, this is
It's horrible.
just brain rot, horrible. Like, I'm like,
Hmm.
why would you watch this? But it's like that dopamine effect that's
Yep.
constantly going and going. And so I think to myself, you're teaching your daughter. I mean, I have not seen her content, but this is my big assumption just from the conversation we're having. The content is actually valuable. You're actually putting something out there that's going to help people in whatever capacity help looks like, right? It looks different for so many different people. And also, the skills that she's going to learn, instead of sitting here consuming all of the brain rot stuff, I'm sure she consumes content on her own too, but she's adding so much good to it. And you're teaching her so much resilience. And, she's learning so many skills. That stuff is invaluable, right? But that's also part of guidance. That's part of growing up. And same too, if you work with, any agency, you have guidance, you have people who are helping you, who are, encouraging you to try something new, to do it a different way, to step outside what you already know. And then you grow and you expand, and then your audience grows, your audience expands, and so does your message, right? Like, everyone wants to be heard. You have to find, how do you cut through that noise? How do you do it differently? How do you create your own category for what you do?
I love exactly this. I love what you're saying. And I think that the idea, no, you're speaking my language, because what I tell people all the time, this is about message. This is about hope. This is about making the world a better place. We're both doing similar business. And people go, why would you interview someone that's in a similar business? Because we need good people who have good voices to be doing as much as they fucking can to make this world a better place. I
Mhm,
can work with a maximum number of people, you as well. But if we're both out there empowering people to tell their stories, to share their voices, and to push
mhm.
back against the spam, together we can make a greater impact than we can alone. And that is where it's at. And like, if we can get more people saying, speak up, tell these human stories, tell these real stories that are important, then we can push back against the slop that these kids are getting fed. You know, Ilani,
1000.
right? And so she's got this new phone, but she's not allowed to watch stuff on it because there's nothing on there that's worthwhile right now. And I said, we're going to be part of the people that are creating the worthwhile stuff so that the kids that
Mm.
are on there, we're going to be something that they can find. We're going to be something that they can go and look for, you know? And that to me is about mission. It's about purpose. It's about saying, we can make a difference. And like, that's where you said what you said. I was just like, yes, yes, and yes,
And more, yes.
because, and more, yes, and at the end of the day, um, I think that if we can empower people, we can change the world. But I want to
Mhm,
ask you this because to get there, there's some things that you have to do. And you
mhm.
have to play part of the game. And the game is not always easy. And, because it's challenging to really get the attention to make a difference. But what's the difference between making a podcast that gets attention and making one that builds real trust?
Mm. There's a piece of vulnerability that's really important in there. I think that's one thing that makes my Happiness Happens podcast successful, and I'll give you the stats. I was looking at it the other day, which I thought was absolutely insane. I haven't actually produced a new episode on that podcast since August of 2024. I'm gonna bring it
Mm,
back, and I wanna bring it back because I think the world needs more of those conversations,
yes, they
and
do.
also, there's a huge part of the show that is me candidly sharing things about myself and my life, right? And also creating space for my guests to do the same. So if you think about how you not structure a conversation, but how you go into a conversation,
Yeah.
even just you and I sitting here today, we're both here, we're both relaxed, we're both aligned, we both wanna have this conversation, and we have the same intention of the conversation, you know? Maybe
Yeah.
maybe you think it's gonna go in a different way, or it's like, we have different questions, I don't necessarily know, like, maybe you have a new question that comes out and so on. Anyways, I digress. But the idea is at the end of the day, we serve a bigger mission, a bigger purpose, right? The mission and the purpose extends so far beyond. And I think that, people wanna get to know who their audience is. People wanna grow their podcast. They wanna grow their show. But it's like, do you really know what people are struggling with? And people will not tell you what they're struggling with until you share with them something that you are struggling with. That said, I'm a huge fan of speak from the scar, not the wound, right? Like, we don't go in and talk about something that we haven't fully worked through, right? And I think that's a really important piece. Like, I'll tell you this, I put my podcast on hiatus, Happiness Happens, because I wasn't able to talk about the topics that I wanted to talk about in that way. I had just gone through a divorce. I was in the midst of figuring out too many things. It was too chaotic. The message wouldn't have landed. And so also as a creator, like, you need to understand, your own self. And so now I look at the show in a different way and I can look at it through a different lens, but I wouldn't have gotten to that lens unless I took a step back. So sometimes you have to take a step back. You got to slow down to speed up. But I think that the most sort of one of the most important parts here is that vulnerability side, and not vulnerability in the overused way that we say it all the time, like, "Oh, go and be vulnerable." It's genuinely telling stories and sharing things where people can see themselves, in what you're saying. So, for example, like you said, we both do similar work. Why would we wanna have this conversation? It could feel like competing. I don't look at it that way. You don't look at it that way, because 'cause I'm gonna say something and someone's gonna resonate with what I'm saying, and you're gonna say something and someone's gonna resonate with what you're saying, right? There's more like, people align to different people, and you are meant and our listener today is meant to help the specific person that they are meant to help. Their specific message, their specific voice, their specific way, and it's gonna look different for everyone. A lot of that comes down to your own personal values as well. Like, I think about my values within my agency and the values of my agency are built off of my own personal values of my life, which are kindness, care, and connection. If it doesn't have those 3 and all 3, I don't want it. Like, I don't even attract it. It doesn't even come into my awareness, right? So, when you create a podcast, you have an idea, you have a purpose for the show, or, like, you have an idea and you have an idea of how you want it to go, but have you thought about all those other things? How does it actually connect to the person that is listening to it? Does it align with your own personal values of your life? Do you know what you even wanna do with it? Like, do you know how you want it to grow, right? It's different than, the creator that's like, "Oh, I wanna make I wanna make hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I wanna have, sold out programs, and I want, 500,000 YouTube subscribers." Like, that's great, like, it's all vanity metrics, though. Like, what does it mean
Yeah.
for you? That's my
Right?
my line of thinking.
I 100% agree. I think if you're getting into it for the numbers, you're going the wrong
Mhm,
way. You
mhm,
have to go into it for the message. The numbers will reflect the connection when you start to find out what the people that you're speaking to are resonating with and that they are seeking from you. And I don't want to completely say, oh, no, yeah, man, you don't want to have 0 views every single video, but
No,
you
that would suck.
do.
Like, let's
That
be
would
honest,
suck.
that would
That would suck.
suck.
But you do have to think about, like, are you focusing on what you want to say or what you feel like you need to be saying? And I think that that's a
Mhm.
challenge too. I want to ask you one more question though. At the end of the day, do you think the future belongs to people chasing algorithms or people genuinely connecting and creating communities?
I never play the algorithm game. For me, I'm all about what is your message? What is the thing that you want to share? And how does that resonate and impact the person that's going to receive it? Algorithms change every single day. And so if you're trying to play the algorithm game, you're always, in my opinion, going to lose because you're chasing something that you can't even control, that you don't even understand. The only thing that you can control is your message. The only thing that you can control is your frequency in which you say it and how you share it and where you share it. So no, I think that when you are chasing your own voice, when you are chasing your own message and you're chasing your own impact, you are trying to compete against your own self. It has nothing to do with other people. And when you get too wrapped up in what other people are doing, I think that's when you start to lose. I think that's when you start to get convoluted. I think that's when it starts to get messy because it's not you, it's outside of you. There's nothing out there that you kind of should be like chasing. Like, I'll caveat in this and saying this too, because over the years, especially, like, you probably would know this too from, like, especially on the media side, it's up and down, up and down. Like, 21, 22 were some of, like, the most fantastic years. Everyone wanted to have a podcast. I was like, "Okay, cool." 23 and 24, I was like, "What is happening?" 25 and 26, fantastic, you know? And so, I always have thought to myself, and I have one of my girlfriends always makes fun of me for this because 'cause I'm very much blinders on. You keep your blinders on, you focus on yourself, you focus on your lane, the impact that you're making, and that's it. I have always found success by doing that. I don't care what other people are doing. Now, I will listen and consume some other content so I can benchmark and I can see and I can
Yeah.
make sure that I'm like, relevant still. And also, I wanna do more than that. I don't wanna just do what other people are doing. I wanna do, like, past that, right? So I'm very much blinders on. It has always worked, and my one friend, she always jokes around. She's like, Simona, there's a whole life happening outside of the bubble that you're in." And I'm like, "There is, yeah, but it's not really a life that I like, in some I just don't care." Like, I'm like, I get that, yeah, there is. And also, my my focus is, like, narrowing in, you know? I have a team. I know, I know my team's families. It's important for me, right? My clients,
Yeah.
I love delivering on the work that we get to do for them. And then and my family, right? There's only so much time. There's only so much capacity. You got to narrow in, you got to focus on you. That was a side tangent. Sorry, but I just think that it's so
No.
important. People talk about success. How do you become successful? Well, you sit down and you do the thing and you do it very well. And until you can do it very well, you just sit down and you continue to do it and you figure it out?
I 100% agree. Where can people go to find out more about you and what you do?
Absolutely. So my website is voltproductions.co, VOLT, and you can find me on any social media platform. Just look for my name, Simona Costantini. And I'd love to connect, love to chat, and I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what resonates from this episode. I would love to know.